I'm gonna tell you about my job market paper, which is titled Skills Distortions and the Labor Market Outcomes of Immigrants Across Space. So let me start with a bit of motivation behind my research questions for this paper. So there is a growing concern among policymakers for spatial inequality in high-income countries. And the idea of spatial inequality is really broad because spatial inequality in general refers to the unequal distribution of resources and opportunities across different geographic areas. Some of the focus, actually most of the focus, has been on spatial earnings inequality, meaning the earnings gap between big and small cities. And recent evidence shows that this spatial inequality is growing and is much higher in the United States than in other countries. And also policymakers in the US are concerned, or are debating about immigration policy. And among many aspects, one of the key focus is the immigrants' performance in their labor market and how the earning gaps with natives evolved through time and statically. So with this paper, I'm trying to merge, to speak about these two research policy agenda, and I answer the questions related to the geography of labor market outcomes of immigrants in the United States, and how this relates to the earnings gap the immigrants face relative to natives, and how also this relates to spatial inequality in this particular country. And finally, I'm gonna answer a question related to how immigration policy influence these outcomes. So to give you a bit of an overview about US immigrants and spatial inequality in the United States. So we know at the moment that in the United States, immigrants earn about 15% less than native workers. And the literature has identified three main aspects behind this fact. So first of all, the type of education or the quality of education that immigrants the type of schooling that immigrants go to can vary across country, and also the language ability of immigrants might be less than that of natives, and also immigrants may lack of literacy. And third fact is related to the fact that immigrants may lack some specific skills to the host country, and so they need to undergo a process of economic assimilation. But apart from these three facts that all relates to immigrants' human capital, the performance of immigrants in the labor market relates to their decisions in terms of occupations and locations. And in particular, the literature has documented that in terms of occupational choices, immigrants and natives tend to specialize into different tasks. And in terms of location choices, the literature has documented and studied quite well the fact that immigrants tend to live more in big and expensive cities relative to native workers. And relative to big cities, we know that in big cities, workers tend to earn more than in smaller cities or rural areas. And this relates to the skill sorting of workers. So the workers source differently across space according to their skills. And also to the fact that certain occupations pay a premium to these workers who choose to perform them. So how do I add to this literature? Well, I start by documenting three facts using US microdata. And the first fact relates to the earnings gap of immigrants, and I show that this earnings gap between immigrants and natives is larger in bigger cities. By digging into this fact, I also show that the lack of city size earnings premium, or the fact that the earnings gap is larger with natives is larger in bigger cities, is there only for immigrants from low-income countries. And finally, I provide some evidence relative to the occupational sorting across space of immigrants and native workers. And I show that workers from high-income countries, meaning both immigrants from high-income countries and natives, work more in cognitive jobs. And this tendency of choosing these jobs is particularly high in big cities. On the other hand, immigrants from low-income countries are more likely to work into non-cognitive occupation, but to live in big cities relative to the other workers. So To interpret these facts, to understand the mechanisms behind them, I built a quantitative general equilibrium spatial model in which I have heterogeneity from the production side or the city side and the worker side. What do I mean by that? I mean that I'm going to model, in the model, cities are going to differ in terms of their production technology and in terms of the housing supply. At the same time, workers in this model are going to be different or going to be heterogeneous in terms of the human capital endowments and how they like or like for their taste for cities and occupation.
A quick clarification question, Gabriele, please.
Sure.
Concerning the fact too, you have documented while comparing the earnings of immigrants in small and big cities, do you control for their year of arrival in the US?
In some of the robustness checks, I have, not in the paper, but I have them. I do control for that, and the fact is robust to that.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks for the question. So you could think of this taste for cities occupation in a couple of ways. So for natives, this could be the home bias, meaning I was born in a certain area. I don't want to leave this area. I want to stay there, close to my family, close and I want to work in occupations that are particular to that area. Whereas for immigrants, their taste for cities and occupations could relate, for example, to the existence of ethnic networks. And we know that immigrants tend to disproportionately locate where the ethnic network is stronger. And at the same time, this model is going to embed also labor market distortions that are going to be specific to city occupations and country of origin. And I'm going to model these labor market distortions as wedges on immigrants' earnings, which you can think of forms of labor market discrimination that immigrants might be subject to. Then with this rich model, I'm gonna study I'm gonna run some counterfactual exercises and policy exercises to study the role of human capital and taste and distortions to explain to what extent the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to change, and how these changes also are going to influence spatial inequality. As a second exercise, I'm gonna try to understand how these allocation channels for immigrants and natives are going to influence housing prices and aggregate output. Finally, in the policy evaluation exercise, I'm going to show you how the inflow of immigrants is going to affect the earnings gap with natives and also across cities. So, what is the preview of the results? So there is my counterfactual exercises revealed that by removing labor market distortions and difference in tastes, the immigrants versus natives earnings gap is going to decrease by about 19%, but at the same time, spatial inequality, so the earnings gap across cities, is going to increase by 2.5%. So this counterfactual is revealing a trade-off between reducing inequality among workers and increasing inequality across cities. Also, how housing prices and aggregate output are going to react. Well, under this counterfactual, housing prices are going to increase relatively more in the big city, and the aggregate output, so the US output, is going to increase by about 1%. And the mechanism behind these findings is related to the reallocation of workers across cities and occupations. So workers under the counterfactual are going to, under this specific counterfactual, are going to reallocate from big to small cities, and within each city, they are going to reallocate mostly towards cognitive occupations. This will create a competition. This creates a competition effect that can be a skills effect, and what determines the main result is going to be determined by what effect is going to overcome the other one. Finally, with the policy exercise, I'm going to show you that when the inflow of new workers is composed of immigrants without a college, the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to increase by 2.4%. But at the same time, spatial inequality is going to decrease by about 0.1%. Whereas when the inflow of new immigrants is composed of immigrants with college, the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease by about 6%. And in this case as well, spatial inequality is going to decrease. What are the data that I use to show you the facts and to estimate, to calibrate my model? So I'm going to use data from the American Community Survey, a sample from IPUMS. And in this data set, I'm going to identify immigrants as foreign-born workers, and I'm going to focus only on first-generation immigrants. Other than the information on workers, I'm going to build a measure of hourly earnings, and I'm going to identify US cities using information on metropolitan statistical areas. I'm going to focus for my main analysis on a sample of male workers who are in their working age, who are employed and work for wages. However, my facts and my model is robust also to estimates obtained from a sample of female workers. So to this information about workers, I'm gonna add some information about the nature of the occupations or the intensity of tasks into certain occupations, so that I can categorize occupations between cognitive and non-cognitive. And to do so, I'm gonna follow the procedure specified in Acemoglu author. Finally, I'm going to add a bit of more information in terms of the immigrants' country of origin to classify them into low-income and high-income countries using data from the World Bank Development Database. Okay, so here I summarize the facts to save a bit of time only with this slide. But I'm happy to show you the facts if you are interested, graphically. So the first fact, as I told you before, relates to the fact that the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is larger in big cities. What does it mean? It means that while for natives, doubling the city size results into about a 3.6% increase in hourly earnings, for immigrants, there is no change in their earnings between, no significant change in their earnings between small and big cities. The second fact, as I was telling you before, relates to the fact that immigrants from low-income countries are those who do not experience any earnings increase by living in big cities. In fact, for immigrants from high-income countries, doubling the city size is associated with a 3.9% increase in hourly earnings. And if you compare this value with the value for natives, I mean, you can see that they are very close. And the third fact...
Another clarification question, Gabriele, please.
Yes, sure.
Are these partial correlations, or do you handle the endogeneity issue with the, let's say, the city size?
Your concern is about, if I understand correctly, whether the endogeneity.
Because you are kind of interpreting this as causal, basically.
I mean, these facts for me, I don't have any instrument or any identification strategy to deal with endogeneity, but the fact that I'm using a structural model, and I'm gonna use an indirect inference technique to obtain my estimates, is going to embed the type of bias within my estimates, and everything will be endogenous to a certain sense within my model. So that's how I'm going to deal with that, if that makes sense to you.
Okay.
Gabriele?
Yeah?
Do you think that fact 3 explains fact 1 and fact 2?
Well, fact 3, yeah, that's a good question. So fact 3 is something that helps me to match fact 1 and fact 2, but it's not completely explaining fact 1 and fact 2. Like the fact that there are distortions for like in the local labor markets, like wedges, like that immigrants face in local labor markets, is also important, if that makes sense. All right, any other question? Okay, so related to fact 3, I told you that fact 3 tells something about the spatial distribution of workers across cities and occupations. In particular, I show that workers from high-income countries tend to work more in cognitive jobs, especially in big cities. So this means that doubling the city size, the share of these workers in cognitive occupations is going to increase by 1 percentage point for natives, by 1.5 percentage point for immigrants from high-income countries, whereas for immigrants from low-income countries, the effect or the increase in the share is not significant. However, this last set of workers are the workers who are more likely to live in big cities. Okay? So how do I go from the data to the model? So the data show that there is an earnings gap that increases with the size of cities, and that this gap is mostly there for immigrants from low-income countries. At the same time, the data show that workers from high-income countries work more in cognitive occupations and in big cities, especially if they are in big cities. So I'm going to build a quantitative general equilibrium spatial model to disentangle the determinants of the earnings gap between immigrants and natives. So to see, for example, as Felix was asking, whether it's the fact that workers have a taste for a certain occupation or a city that explain my facts, for example. And also, I need this model to quantify the consequences on spatial inequality for after an inflow of new immigrant workers. So the building blocks of the models are 3. So first, I need differences or heterogeneity in technology across cities, like was documented by Atalay and co-authors, or Eckhout and co-authors, or Elisa Giannone in these recent papers. At the same time, I need to embed in the model heterogeneity in skill and taste for where to live and work. And to this, I'm gonna follow Perrin Sparber and Albert and Moraz. And finally, I'm gonna model labor market distortion following C and co-authors in this econometrica paper. So what's the setup of the model?
Gabriele.
Yep.
Just before you jump into the model, somebody has asked whether these results hold when you consider high skill and low skill workers, regardless of their country of origin. And additionally, if you have considered middle income countries at some point.
Okay, that's a good question. So the fact hold for also if I consider college and non-college, and in the so the question is yes, the answer is yes, and related to the middle income countries, here I had to make decisions in terms of how I cut my sample, how I created the sets of immigrants in my sample. Okay, so I have a lot of workers coming from Mexico, of course. In the US, Mexican are the most represented group. So they would be representing most the middle income countries. So the question was related cutting the sample into the sample of immigrants into 3 groups rather than 2. I would say, yeah, I mean, not I would say, the fact holds, because like the relationship is actually non-linear. So the like up to 30,000 is flat, and then it becomes increasing between earnings and city size premium. So yeah, they hold. So in terms of the model setup, other questions?
That's all for now.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of the model setup, so in this model, like you can imagine the US economy represented by a set of cities, in J cities, in which, where in each city there is a representative firm that produces an output Y, which is homogeneous and tradable across cities. Then this firm in each city is going to operate using a CS technology, which uses as input human capital or skilled units in cognitive and non-cognitive occupations. So here the notation is a bit, I'm still dealing with this notation, but M stands for non-cognitive and D for cognitive. Then each city or each firm or each technology in each city will be characterized by a certain productivity bias, which I capture with this parameter theta j. And the productivity bias will be in cognitive occupations, so D. And also, each city will be characterized by an endogenous housing supply, HJ. On the labor supply side, on worker side, this economy is populated by a continuum of workers, I, and each of these workers is going to belong to a group G, which is a tuple of KEX. K stands for country of origin, E for education, and X for experience. Each of these groups is going to have a measure phi j, such that by summing up all the phi j's, I'm going to end up with a unity, so with the total amount of workers in the economy. And each of these workers belonging to a group is going to be endowed with a vector of human capital to perform both occupations, so both the non-cognitive occupation and the cognitive occupation. So human capital is specific, occupation specific. And then each worker is going to have a taste for cities and occupation, which I represent by this letter Z, which is going to be specific to the city J, the occupation O, and the group G. You can think, I'm still a bit thinking about whether to call them amenities or not, but you can think as this taste also as amenities that a city can offer to these workers. And then workers are going to be are going to have a taste shock for cities and occupations, which is represented by this vector of epsilons.
A
so
clarification question.
Yes.
Yeah, the taste shock. What I noticed is that. Okay, let me frame it as a question. Do you assume that the taste shock across origins is homogeneous? Because at this stage, the implicit assumption is that, well, only city occupations kind of differ across immigrants.
Okay, so thanks for the question. It's a good question, and related to the fact that the taste shock is homogeneous, yes, in the sense that is drawn, like for each worker, is going to be drawn from the same distribution. I'm not going to model a distribution like a taste shock from a distribution for immigrants from low income or high income and natives. They're going to all draw from the same distribution. What is going to determine the differences among them is the Z. So like they're going to draw from a different part of that distribution, if that makes sense.
Following up to that, okay, well, maybe I will come back on that later on.
Okay, thank you. So very quick about the problem of the firm. The problem of the firm is quite standard. Firms in each city are going to maximize their profits, minimizing their labor cost. So according to this profit maximization problem, in which and each city, of course, will be characterized by a certain elasticity of substitution between the two inputs. So by solving this profit maximization problem, I end up with and combining the first order conditions, I'm going to end up with an expression for the city specific skills price ratio. So which is going to depend on the amount of skills supplied by workers in each occupation, in each city, on the elasticity of substitution, and on the productivity bias parameter. Then in terms of the earnings of the worker, of each worker, the earnings of each worker in a city J, occupation O, for a worker who belongs to group G, are given by this expression here. So by the product of the skills price specific to a city J and an occupation O, the amount of skills supplied by the worker in an occupation, by the worker in group G in an occupation O, and by this parameter tau, J or G, which so sorry, here is a typo, which is the city occupation group specific earnings compensation wedge. So you can think about this parameter as a reward if it takes a value on earnings if it takes a value above 1, or a penalty if it takes a value below 1. All right. So now that I show you earnings, I'm going to show you the problem of the worker and how I'm going to end up with a choice equation. So workers are going to, given a city occupation choice, workers are going to, for each group, are going to solve a utility maximization problem in which they are going to maximize their utility subject to their budget constraint. So they're going to choose, they're going to pick consumption and housing such that the utility is maximized. So related to the previous questions, the shocks, the taste shocks, I'm going to assume that they follow a Gamble distribution and that they are IAD across all workers. By solving this utility maximization problem, I end up with a demand for goods, by plugging them back into the utility function, I end up with an expression for the indirect utility for each worker from group G for living in a city J and working in an occupation O. And so as you can see, this indirect utility will depend on the housing prices on a constant term, on housing prices, on the earnings of each worker, on the taste shock, and on the taste for living in a specific occupation and city, and on the taste shock. So by using the properties of the Gamble distribution, I can derive an expression for the share of workers from group G living in a city J and working in occupation O as follows. Okay, so the share of workers from group G in city J and occupation O is going to depend on the indirect utility for a specific location, and on how much this indirect utility is going to weight compared to all the other possible alternatives. So if you're familiar with this discrete choice model, this setting is known but a multinomial logic framework.
A quick question again.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is related to the question I raised a few minutes ago. The point is, with this indirect utility, what you're implicitly saying is if we kills weight differences across origin and cities, occupation pairs, and amenity differentials, then the probability to move from any origin to that city will be the same.
Well, no, because you have the Z.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The Z is J or J is the amenity differential. It implicitly means that if there is no longer amenity difference in amenities, if there is no longer waste differences, then the probability to move from any origin country in the world to, let's say, Houston will be the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And do you think that this can rationalize the observations? Because usually the reason why let's say the random test for specific cities from specific origins matter is because it allows the migration probability to differ even if there is not amenity differentials, even if there is not waste differential.
Mm-hmm.
And also your migration probability expression is implicitly saying that, well, for any infinitesimal change, right, in the wage in any specific city occupation, this will automatically allow people to relocate.
Exactly, but not all people, a share of these people.
Now, one converging force of such a model should be the idea that, well, there is this shape parameter in the Gamble distribution that kind of regulate the response of people to income difference, to change in income. And I implicitly here, you're assuming that the shape parameter is 1.
No, I'm assuming that it's 0. I'm assuming that the shape parameter is 0 and that the location and scale are 1. And then
Okay,
make this assumption.
what I call shape parameter was you're calling the scale. For instance, this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
The question it raises is that when the shape parameter is 1, basically the effect of a change in housing price or change in wages are kind of inflated.
Okay.
Maybe it might be nice in a robustness check to see to what extent it affects your outcomes.
Okay, this is a good suggestion. Actually, I haven't thought about it before. Actually, like I mean, I thought of whether to let the test and the test for location or occupation shocks should have been drawn from different distributions, but actually I haven't thought about the scale. Okay, I will try to do it. Thanks. So how much time do I have left just for?
Around 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Okay, then I'll skip the housing market. I'll show you the special equilibrium, or not even, I'm going to the results. So what are the assumptions that allows me to identify the model? So first assumption is that I'm not gonna let the elasticity of substitution in inputs, the elasticity of housing supply, and the land to vary across city. Okay, these are all assumption that I can relax if someone is concerned. That I'm gonna assume that the initial distribution of workers across groups is given. I'm going to assume that wages do not face any labor market distortion. I'm going to assume that wages and earnings are going to vary only by origin, so not by education or experience. And this is another assumption that I can relax. And then I'm going to normalize the taste parameter or the amenities in the smallest city and for the non-cognitive occupation for all groups to 1. Okay, and the calibration that I'm going to show you today is done on 2 cities, so a small city and a big city, 3 country of origin, natives, low income, high income, 2 education groups, not college, and 3 experience group. Those with 0-14 years of experience, 15-29 years of experience, and more than 30 years of experience. So I skip this. I'll go to the experiment. So I'm going to use the model to quantify the role of human capital distortions on earnings gap between natives and immigrants and the earnings gap between cities. So the experiments I'm going to show you today are experiments that in the first case are going to allow immigrants and natives with the comparable, I'm going to allow immigrants to have the same human capital as natives with same observable characteristics. So these workers are gonna supply the same amount of human capital. Second, I'm gonna shut down the differences in taste with natives, meaning I'm gonna give to immigrants the same taste for cities and occupations than natives, with the same observable characteristics. In the third experiment, I'm going to shut down the labor market distortions. So I'm going to assume that immigrants and natives, immigrants do not face any discrimination in the labor market. In the fourth experiment, I'm gonna combine experiment 2 and 3, so no labor market distortions and no difference in amenities with natives. And in the fifth experiment, I'm gonna shut down all the channel of differences in allocations between immigrants and natives, apart from the initial distributions in the groups. So with this table, what I want to communicate to you. So first of all, I want to show you that when there are no differences, so column 1 shows that when there are no differences in human capital, the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease by about 20%. But at the same time, that spatial earnings inequality, as defined as the wage gap between big and small cities is going to increase by 1.1%. Whereas when I remove differences in tastes relative to natives, the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease by about 6.2%, and at the same time there will be a large increase into spatial inequality of about 3%. When I remove wedges on earnings, so no labor market distortions for immigrants, the wage gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease by about 10%. And at the same time, earnings inequality is going to decrease across cities by a small amount, but it's going to decrease by 0.1%. And finally, when there are no wedges on earnings and differences in amenities between immigrants and natives, their gap is going to shrink by the same amount in the case of the human capital, but spatial earnings inequality is going to increase by 2.5%, so about 1.5 percentage points more. And when I shut down all channels, of course, I'm going to have a combination of all these columns in column 5, and earnings inequality and the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease the most. But at the same time, spatial inequality across cities is going to increase. Spatial inequality is going to increase. Okay, so since I don't have a lot of time, I think at this point I left 5 minutes. So about the mechanism, like very quick worker reallocation across cities from this table. The reallocation in most of the experiments, the reallocation happens from big to small cities. So in the case of human capital, workers from all countries are going to reallocate from the big to the small cities, whereas in the case of column 4, so no differences, amenities, and distortions, there will be a massive reallocation of immigrants from low-income countries to the small cities, but this will be mitigated by removing wedges on earnings. And whereas the only case in which I have reallocation of immigrants from the small to the big cities is in the case of removing wedges on earnings. So reallocation across occupations within cities. In the case of human capital, immigrants in cognitive occupations, so in this case will be the first, not column, but let's call it, column 1. Immigrants in the case of human capital, immigrants will decrease. The share of immigrants in cognitive occupations will decrease in both cities. Whereas in the case where there are no differences in amenities and distortions, immigrants from low-income countries are going to choose more. The share of immigrants from low-income countries is going to increase in cognitive occupations in both cities. And when all inequality channels are removed, as you see, like the share of all workers or immigrant workers is going to kind of converge towards the shares of native workers represented by this blue line here. So very quick about the...
Gabriele, I have one question before you move on. With respect to the counterfactuals, Joel asked whether in the pool, so in column 5 of the previous slide, if we can interpret that as a pure population composition effect, as in inequality being due to the migrant/native population being different across big and small cities?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Actually, you got the point, I would say, because what's left here, why these workers are not unequal anymore? Why they are not equal? Well, because there is still composition in the shares in which they allocate, or like in the groups they allocate. So the shares like of college with X years of experience of immigrants in this column 5 will be different from the shares of the natives with the same level of experience and education, which is the comparable in terms of observable characteristics. But yeah, so what is left here is composition. Like to deal with this would be nice, for example, to include selection, like to have a kind of to model selection somewhat, so that I can play also with the initial shares in the economy. That's a very good question. Thanks. About immigration policy evaluation, I allow for general equilibrium responses after an inflow of immigrants. So the first policy allows for an inflow of immigrants with no college education. Second policy, I allow for an inflow of immigrants with college education. And to make the policy comparables, I allow overall the total employment or the total population in my economy is going to increase by 1 percentage point. Okay, so under the first policy, the employment share or the people who live and work in the big city is going to increase by 1 percentage point. Similar in the case of the inflow of no college, so column 2. So in both cases, the population in the big city is going to increase by more or less the same amount of people. But in terms of the allocations, in terms of occupations, in the case of an inflow of immigrants with no college, the share of immigrants in the cognitive occupations in the cognitive occupation is going to increase by 0.2 percentage point, both in the small city and in the big city. Whereas in the case of an inflow of college graduated or college educated workers, the share of immigrants, the share of immigrants in cognitive occupations is going to increase by more in the big city. By 0.8 percentage points in the small city and 1.1 percentage point in the big city. Overall, it's going to increase more in the big city. So in terms of the results, in terms of the inequality or the earnings gap between immigrants and natives, and spatial inequality, by allowing for an inflow of immigrants with no college, the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to increase by 2.6%. But inequality across cities, especially earnings inequality across cities, is going to decrease by 0.3%. Why? Because I didn't have time to show you before, but because in this case, the competition effect coming from the reallocation or the allocation of these workers, so competition effect is the effect on prices, on skilled prices, is not going to be compensated by the skill effect. So these workers will decrease the average productivity of a certain city. And overall, of course. In the case of an inflow of college-educated workers, in column 2, the gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease by about 6%, and spatial earnings inequality, also in this case, is going to decrease by 0.1%. In this case, the competition effect is going to be compensated by the skill effect. So these workers, even though they're going to make the labor markets more competitive, they will bring more productivity, so that this productivity or skill effect is going to compensate for the negative effect on prices of the increasing competition. So to sum up, I hope by the end of today, I convinced you that I answered these 3 questions, which are what is the geography of immigrants' labor market outcomes in the United States, how this relates to the earnings gap with natives and spatial inequality, and how does immigration policy influence these outcomes. So I showed you that there is an earnings gap between immigrants and natives that grows with the city size, and that's true only for immigrants from low-income countries. And these are workers who are more likely to work in non-cognitive occupations, but at the same time to live in big cities. So to explain this fact, I built and calibrated a general equilibrium spatial model where the production in big cities favors cognitive occupations, where workers are going to trade off earnings with taste or amenities for living and working in specific cities. And at the same time, immigrant workers in each specific local labor market are going to face some distortions, some forms of discrimination. So the main results show that removing the counterfactual results show that removing heterogeneity between immigrants and natives is going to imply a reallocation of workers from big to small cities, so that the earnings gap between immigrants and natives is going to decrease, but spatial inequality is going to increase. At the same time, when I simulate new immigration policies, the main result is that for an inflow of immigrants without college, earnings inequality among workers is going to increase, but spatial inequality is going to decrease. So this is might be food for thought for policymakers and for you who might have some suggestion now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. We are going to have a short discussion now by Chambu Kim. So if you want to share your slides, that is perfect.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can
Yep.
see it. You have 10 minutes for the discussion.
Okay, so thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, Gabriele. And I really genuinely enjoyed to read your paper, and I'm very happy to share my thoughts on this project. Okay, so in this paper, Gabriele is focusing on the earnings disparity between native and immigrant workers in the US, which stems from the spatial dimension. So in the model, natives and immigrants are making their own decisions on location and occupation choices, but these choices are subject to two kinds of wedges. And given these wedges, there's a misallocation of production factor across different local labor markets. So what we actually observe in the data as earning inequality is an equilibrium output of this misallocation across space and origin. So in this paper, Gabriele emphasizes on two kinds of wedges. The first one is local amenity wedges, which will bring labor supply wedges in equilibrium. And second one is earning wedges as a tax to a wage that immigrants receive. And these wedges are asymmetric and asymmetrically exist in different local labor market through three criteria. So the first one was location, big versus small city. Occupation was cognitive versus non-cognitive. Origin was high income versus low income country origin. And given this, the pioneering spatial model of aesthetic economy with distortions, Gabriele applies this model, this novel framework to immigrant and native earnings disparity, and he investigated and quantified the spatial general equilibrium effects coming from occupation labor misallocation to the earnings disparity. So in big sense, I had like two comments, or I want to share like two thoughts that I had. Like, as inspiring and important as this channel is, as you showed that the difference in the observable characteristics between immigrants and natives, the existence of these two wedges are more important than that. I thought we need a bit deeper understanding. So in the sense that how we classify the origins of the immigrants and how it relates to the two wedges. So first thing that I found is that the high and low income countries classification oftentimes overlaps with race or ethnicity differences. So given this different classifications, if we interpret the heterogeneity of the immigrants by high versus low income countries, then maybe those low income country origin immigrants are facing more severe financial friction, and especially you model the housing part. I thought, although it's not directly captured in the model, but this margin could be much more important for the two wedges. But instead, if we interpret this classification as race and ethnicity, then of course the existence of discrimination arises. And especially if we interpret these wedges as discrimination, we already know that wedges can be endogenous to counterfactual demographic changes in counterfactual equilibrium, right? So for instance, if we think as this wedge as ethnic network, then of course this network will be stronger if there's more immigrant population in the local labor market. But if we instead interpret as racial discrimination, then there is a famous prediction how the labor supply changes the degree of this discrimination. So consequently, depending on how we really interpret and classify the origins of immigrants, I thought maybe your policy application could be very different to mitigate the misallocation of occupation and labor forces across different spaces. But of course, I think you could check, because you have estimated wedges, you can just basically see the share of immigrant population like Asians or Hispanics in one big city and how it relates to the estimated two wedges. So I think it's something that you can dig a bit deeper. My second point is a bit more challenging, and I have no idea if it would be feasible. So I thought one interesting omitted variable in your setting model is the year of arrival in the US. And I think there's one important question that you can ask, like how does country-specific human capital interact with these two wedges? So imagining you extend your setting model to a dynamic model, the choice of location and occupation under these two wedges is something happening during the immigrants integration. And as you may know, there are like recent papers discussing how exogenous allocation of refugees could have like long run effects on their integration and so on. So I thought if like immigrant specific initial condition interacts more with some wedges, then maybe you could observe cohort specific spatial sorting patterns from your data. And you can also tackle the spatial generality effects on not only immigrant integration, but also the host country-specific human capital accumulation. And then just a few minor comments, like as there were like two questions from the audience that maybe you could add your control variables like the year of arrival or state fixed effects. There might be immigrants concentration in a few US states. And second, in your paper, if you could have like mentioned earlier that you actually you're not examining only the partial correlation between earnings and CD size, but you actually do a proper regression with a bunch of control variables. And if you did that, you could have like saved a bit more time. And the remaining two are just like technical and minor, so I wouldn't even mention. And this is all for me. And thank you very much again for the presentation, Gabriele.
Thanks a lot for these comments, Changu. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate because you got many points that I mean I've had in my mind throughout the development of this project. So if you can go back just to, I mean, let's start from the beginning. I can try to argue a bit with you. Okay, so with this. The classification of origins. At the beginning, I was trying to do something related to k-means clustering, like try to understand whether there are other dimensions rather than just GDP per capita to kind of measure differences in origins rather than, again, productivity in the country of origin. But I would say that, yeah, like I could do that. But that okay, and this, like what you have in mind is race and ethnicity. That would add a layer of heterogeneity in the model, wouldn't it? Or like, are you speaking in terms of the empirical facts?
Like both, but this is something you can do, right? You just have to cluster your words differently.
Yeah. That is something I can do as another check. Yeah, for sure. Then in terms of the interpretations, I agree with you 100%. And in fact, like I'm always cautious to say this is like these wedges are this specific thing or this other thing, because like potentially they could be anything, like could be whatever I have in mind. So the interpretation that they give them related to discrimination, it's at the very beginning, like also in the paper, if you noticed, I don't call them like discrimination throughout the rest of the paper. It's just introduction, just to give a bit of background. But yeah, I know this is an issue, and at the moment, an issue. This is something that might be solvable. At the moment, since I have very few wedges, like in terms of earnings, I cannot even correlate them with some measure, like in the data. I mean, you suggested the shares. I could do that, but at the moment I have 4 data points for each country of origin. So it would be 4 data points, like for like to to see on a scatter plot, for example. And I don't know to what extent that could have been captured, like some interesting with this version of the model, of course. If I allow, for example, these wedges not to vary across education, I mean, if I allow them to vary across rather than only country of origin, but also across education and experience, I would have a much broader set of estimates, which then, of course, I could correlate with some measures to see how they vary and what could be determining them. But related to this, the counterfactual demographic changes, what you have in mind is that by reallocating workers, also the wedge could be changing. Is like reallocating workers.
So
okay.
In one of your like experiment, you shut down the observable characteristics difference channel, and then
Yeah. Okay. This. Okay. I'll think about this. Thanks. Okay. Good. Related to slide 3. Yeah. Okay. Here, you got many points. Like here, in the sense that, so. Of course, in the very first version of the model, I also embedded year of arrival in the US, or actually years spent in the US. I had to make some modeling choices, and that would have add another layer of heterogeneity that is not. So, for example, like if a person has 10 years of experience in the labor market, they might have only 1 year spent in the US. And in terms of solving the model, understanding what's going on, kind of mapping that number to, that number would be relative to what? It's a bit tricky. So in the very beginning, I had this also, and but it was a bit messy. But it's something that maybe in a dynamic version of the model, as you suggested, I could do. Because this project was born trying to understand what are the whether people assimilate differently according to where they come from and according to where they're gonna live. So I mean, even without knowing it, like I think you got to that point, because there is literature showing that human capital might be country specific, that some countries specialize hardly on certain type of jobs, they are more intensive in terms of type of jobs, and so that when people move from the country to another, they're gonna kind of bring with them their knowledge, and so depending on the type of technology they're gonna find in the host country, their human capital will be more or less complementary. But in terms of how this affect, for example, the wedges, I would say, in a certain sense, these wedges could capture also that, no? Like not the quality of the human capital, let's say, but like the perception that employers might have of people coming from not a so known university, or not a a well-known country for I know if you think about developing countries, there are few, I mean, also in developed countries, but there are few institutions that are kind of recognized in the US. So you might be a doctor in your country, but then in the US you can find some hard times, so because of lack of licensing, for example, and that in a certain sense might be also captured by my wedge. Whereas in terms of what do you have in mind with the dynamic model here in terms of wedges on initial condition, core specific spatial sorting? I'm asking you, because I would like to know, because this could be something interesting.
So just one example, you define your wedges based on experience, right? But if you think of the years, like whose country experience, then initial condition matters, and the wedge might affect more, and then they just specialize in non-cognitive occupations just because of those wedges, and in long run they get you see my point. Okay, I'll think about that. Okay. but your expertise, I'm not even sure if it's feasible.
No, but thanks. Like, and there was something else in the next slide. Okay, the minor comments. Yeah, this, I think the first one is something that I can do. Disclaimer, my facts, like the facts that I have in the paper are unconditional means. Okay, so whatever you see there is unconditional. Then in the robustness, in the appendix, I have also all these set of robustness checks by controlling for observable characteristics like education, experience, country of origin, occupation, gender. And yeah, I could also add a control for year of arrival for sure. But state fixed effect, why would you say so? Since I'm looking at across cities, like that would capture differences in bigger labor markets. Don't you think that that is gonna kill my variation?
No offense. I just thought a big city in California would be very different from the other in like Iowa. So there might be just a shifter. You see my point, right?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And okay, for the regression specification, okay, this I could do it. And table, okay, the table as well. And SMM, I mean, the necessity is, I mean, I could do also, I mean, again, this is a long-term project. At the beginning, I was estimating amenities, human capital using reduced form ways, and then embed, like putting these parameters inside the model and solving the model. But and that is a very nice way to deal with the issue of simulated method of moments, especially when you have a lot of parameters. I think I could do that again, but I don't know. For now, like the necessity of SMM is that if you go in the other direction, you need exogenous variation, something that makes you claim for exogeneity for each of the parameters that you estimate. Whereas here, with SMM and doing some kind of indirect inference, I'm also embedding these issues within my parameters. So more macro-ish way of dealing with that, I would say. Thank you, though. Like, I really appreciate it.